Section 2. Farm to table. Farm to table is a common expression to describe a dinner where the consumer is knowledgeable and satisfied with the source of their food and the labor involved. It has evolved into a social movement that aims at spreading an active awareness and investment into local small farms. From soil and seeds to the dining table, we are awakened to question the source of our nutrition and production. In this part of the orientation, we will be using the Real Food Wheel to guide us on this journey. In the past 10 years, a national student-led movement has taken it further by coining the term real food. Importantly, the Real Food movement incorporates a framework of intersectionality to a topic that prioritizes environmental issues. Real Food Standards 2.0. Real food is a holistic term to describe food that truly nourishes producers, the earth, consumers, and communities, all of the aspects of the food system. In 2008, a group of students and advisors developed the Real Food Standards, a set of criteria and certifications that define real food. The term Real Food Standards refers to the entire framework that qualifies real food. The purpose of these standards is to incentivize purchasing from food producers who reflect the values of real food and who are most disadvantaged in the market. Just because some food products do not qualify as real food according to these standards does not mean that they are bad or that they cannot have positive qualities associated with them. Indeed, there are many food producers that do not qualify as real food producers who are worth supporting through our institutional dollars, and there is no reason institutions should not do so. It is important to note that these standards are not offering a vision of an ideal food system. They are meant to encourage progress towards a vision. The standards are a tool to identify producers that clearly exceed industry norms in ways that are impartially documented and accessible to the public. What is the Real Food Challenge? The Real Food Challenge is a student-led organization that works to increase the amount of sustainable food on campuses across the nation. By 2020, the campaign aims away from industrial agriculture and towards a socially, environmentally, and ecologically just network and resource for campuses that sign the campaign by setting a goal of 20% real food by 2020. The Real Food Wheel. The Real Food Wheel is a visualization of all the elements of a food system that pursues real food. It's broken up into 4 parts: producers, the earth, consumers, and communities. We will be referring to the wheel throughout this video to examine each part further. On May 6, 2017, students from the California State Universities and in the California State Student Association, or CSSA, voted yes on a resolution for real food systems in the CSU, urging CSSA to support an increase in real food purchasing, to contest corporate food service kickbacks at 8 CSU campuses, and promote small student and community-based businesses. Earlier this year, Real Food teamed up with Migrant Justice to fight for #MilkWithDignity in Ben & Jerry's products after Vermont dairy workers organized, marched, and demanded Ben & Jerry's to honor their 2015 agreement and sign a legally binding contract. Producers looks at the labor, farmers, and farm workers that hold down the fork. This brings us to the first part of the Real Food Wheel. The land we know now as the United States has been worked to produce economic prosperity and technological advancement. But all of this is rooted in moments of slavery, manifest destiny, and imperialism. Each of these processes has led up to today's corporate consolidation of agricultural lands. Corn and land. Corn, or el maíz, is a beautiful example of the cultural, spiritual, ecological partnership between people and landscapes. El maíz is someone we have known for a long time. They can remind us of a different way of living that allowed balance between communities of people and the land. In the past century, however, the farm-to-table movement has evolved because though we can feed our rapidly growing population, we cannot yet do it fairly. The divide between small farms and big ag has deepened to form two very distinct processes: the farm-to-factory movements and the factory-to-table movements. But first, we must take a look at some unsettling documents that demonstrate a brief look at the fight for survival for Native tribes and communities. The concept of ownership of land was used against Indigenous people to grow the wealth of settlers since the 16th centuries up until today. Today, there are over 600 tribes in the United States. Many tribal communities maintain their ancestral connections to land. However, many are unable to do so. There are several factors contributing to this. Some live on reservation land that does not accommodate farming. Other families are forced to leave traditional land or reservations to find work and integrate with the global economy to survive. Still others are displaced by overwhelming violence. There are some Native-led social movements working for food sovereignty and environmental justice in the hopes that returning to a more traditional diet will counter contemporary epidemics, such as diabetes and heart disease. Due to institutionalized lack of access to social and economic resources in the United States, but also around the world, erasure of indigenous societies is common. The displacement of indigenous people from central Mexico is an epidemic. Many indigenous people in Central America and throughout South America are displaced to develop the land that had been their territory. They have lost their land to efforts to support the agricultural industry, including Coca-Cola, Monsanto, and the North American Free Trade Agreement. In the place of origin of corn, this globally important crop, those who have done the work of care and stewardship are most threatened. The loss of this intergenerational knowledge of the climate and landscape contributes further to environmental degradation and mismanagement. These unsettling realities happen across the world and even in our own backyard. The land that we now know as UC Santa Cruz and many parts of California are stained by the violent and brutal displacement of Native people, specifically here, the Amamutsun Ohlone tribe. Our system of producing food looks fundamentally different now from the way it did 500 or even 50 years ago. What does the farm-to-factory system look like today? You would be surprised. Farm to factory. El Maíz will tell you of El Santo, the myth that dictates your health. El Santo heard the world speak their fear that there were simply too many people in the world to feed everyone fairly. It did everything it could to feed the hungry people at first, but took over from there. Fearful of food scarcity, driven by the promise of abundance, the people gave in. Freezer preservation, truck produce year-round, artificially sweetened water and plastic waste, fried and crunchy foods, burgers without an expiration date. Fast food culture was only keeping up with the speed of capitalism. Food assembly lines, chemical experimentation for preservation. Livestock became live stocks, nourishment determined by affordability. The threat of deportation, anti-immigrant sentiment, lack of immigration reform all contribute to repression and exploitation of migrant farm workers. Contribution to pollution, contaminated waters. El Santo is the invisible force that powers factories to bring food to your table. Anyone who speaks out against the system, well, Each state has its own unique laws and food system. While some might think that tech companies are the biggest contributors to California's economy, agriculture is actually number one. Due to the unique ecology of the Central Valley, California is able to grow produce from March to November, almost year-round. California supplies the entire United States with warm weather produce such as salad greens and lettuces and berries of all kinds. Because of their small size and delicate nature, these crops are very labor intensive, demanding a lot of people working for long hours. These crops are also very desirable and expensive once they reach the market. Unequal social standing, based today on the concept of citizenship, favors the landowner. In some cases, landowners are forced to balance their potential profits against the needs of the laborers. Sell high, buy low. This basic explanation might begin to explain the sad history of exploitation and violence towards people so familiar to agricultural communities, specifically people of color. Factory to table. For El Maíz, the harvest is their last goodbye to their roots. Then they're dragged into the industrial world. It is ground up and separated into various components which are sent elsewhere to fulfill a variety of industrial uses, such as feeding livestock, mixing into gasoline in the form of ethanol, adding texture to food, candy, and vitamins, and many more. Today, everybody eats corn every day, even without eating corn. Transformed, packaged, transported again and again, the pollution associated with food packaging is also a part of the food system. When it comes to natural resources, we're looking at water, soil, seeds, and biodiversity, all of which have been under attack as seen on the news.
Flint's tap water was laced with dangerous levels of lead. The state knew about it and did nothing.
The lead crisis in Flint, Michigan, which continues, brought national attention to structural environmental racism.
The Army later said it would begin an environmental assessment that could delay the project further. It was not immediately clear if Trump's order superseded that move.
The environmental impact report for the Dakota Access Pipeline was approved despite months of resistance from a transnational tribal community and allies, many of which stayed on site and were arrested.
If it wasn't for Facebook or social media, then nobody would know about our story.
Is now officially open for business, a $3.8 billion investment in American infrastructure that was stalled, and nobody thought any politician would have the guts to approve that final leg. And I just closed my eyes and said, do it.
In the aftermath, more than 15,000 people were hospitalized with respiratory problems. On Monday, Chevron pleaded no contest to 6 criminals.
In the places where they get their oil, they're a bad actor. Ask the people in Canada fighting their fracking. Ask the people in Ecuador who've had to live with their waste.
Because we can't allow them to control our lives here in Richmond. We're going to run our local politics, and we're going to drive Chevron's people out of government and return the power to the people here in Richmond.
Indigenous communities in Richmond, California are leaders in the rising movement against Chevron's dominance in the local economy, politics, and environment.
Refineries are called sacrifice zones. This is an indigenous issue. We don't need to take the oil out of the ground. It's important for the oil to stay in the ground. And, we don't need this profit. We don't need this capitalism.
We know that the refinery corridor healing walks are connected to issues and struggles of keeping fossil fuels in the ground all around the world. Today, our guest, Gloria Ochigo-Santi from the Sapara Nation in the Amazon, is actually from a community where their territories are divided into blocks of oil that can be sold off or auctioned off to different countries to come into the Amazon and to drill out oil from the most biodiverse regions of the entire world. The Amazon provides a fifth of the air that everybody breathes, and if you drilled the most biodiverse part of the Amazon, it would only provide oil for the world for a couple of days. Most of the oil that's drilled out of the Amazon actually comes to California.
It was designed as an impregnable deep freeze to protect the world's most precious seeds from any global disaster and ensure humanity's food supply forever. But the global seed vault, buried in a mountain deep inside the Arctic Circle, has been breached after global warming produced extraordinary temperatures over the winter, sending meltwater gushing into the entrance tunnel.
Things are looking worse and worse the longer those with decision-making power deny that we need change. The Doomsday Seed Library, constructed in ice to preserve biodiversity in the event of post-apocalypse, was ruined because permafrost melt increased even beyond projected rates.
Man-made disasters. But soaring temperatures in the Arctic at the end of the world's hottest ever recorded year led to melting and heavy rain.
Not to mention that Big Ag, specifically Monsanto, are experimenting with GMOs, genetically modified organisms, in plants and animals, along with an aggressive campaign to patent seeds and sue anyone who doesn't pay up.
That corn is then used to make a variety of different products. Not just food, you'll find corn derivatives in Coke, milk, toothpastes, aspirin, and varnish. Corn is also the most popular animal feed, and when you consider the fact that 85% of all US corn is genetically modified, you'll realize that GMOs are actually all around you. They are not allowed, for example, to replant these seeds, nor to sell or share them with anyone else, thus ensuring that Monsanto's revenue remains stable and growing. The language of these rules is so convoluted that farmers could potentially be found liable even in cases when the wind randomly blows Monsanto seeds from a neighbor's farm.
Isolated incidents like these become part of a bigger and digital conversation, and worldwide patterns are tackled through localized action and sustainable alternative models. As we teach ourselves and others the truth behind violent, toxic, and unsustainable realities, we begin to reflect on where we fall into all of this. As you dive into your time here at UC Santa Cruz and beyond, you will learn about how UC Santa Cruz is a leader in the farm to college movement.